Welcome to the Creativity Roots. Today I'm reacting to a video from Jordan Peterson. And if you have been in the internet at all, I don't need to introduce who Jordan Peterson is. For sure you have seen or heard something from him, because he's everywhere, and not always for the best reasons. He's a very controversial figure. He's a man who speaks his mind. He's very well versed, very good speaker. He used to be a professor at the University of Toronto, a professor of psychology. He's a psychiatrist. Very smart individual. Just watching him, how he manages the situation and how he manages the conversation. He is a powerful speaker. And although I don't agree with him at all, because he has very strong political ideologies and very strong political bias, I would say he's worth spending the time listening and learning from him how well he manages himself in a situation of confrontation, how well he manages himself in a difficult conversation. And this is something that we can all learn from. Yeah, I don't agree with many of the things that he says or do, but there is a lot to learn from him. Talking about creativity is actually something very interesting, because although he has a very strong political ideologies, he can be biased by these ideologies. Listening to him from a professional perspective as a psychiatrist, as a psychologist, is actually very interesting. I'm going to react to his video and be open-minded in the spirit of promoting critical thinking, which is something that I do in this channel. Although I don't agree with him, I still find value in a lot of his arguments. Let's watch this video and see where this takes us. Best advice from creative.
Why is it in this room? Why does it cost $1 billion? Why is that painting worth so much? And the answer to that is, well, we don't really know. Like, it happened. They're sacred objects in some sense, and we gaze at them in ignorance and wonder. And the reason for that is that the unknown shines through the maddest and in partially articulated forms. Real artists are contending with the unknown, right? And they're
so you can see how passionate he is. And he uses a lot of analogies, a lot of metaphors to speak. So sometimes, if you're not into art or creativity, you might find it difficult to follow him, to follow what he says, because he uses a lot of rich language, a lot of analogies. So you have to pay attention to what he says to get what he's trying to say.
Possessed by it. They have a personality trait, openness, that makes them do that. They can't even help it. And I've had lots of creative people in my clinical practice, and I can tell you the worst thing creative people is to not be creative, because they just die. They're
Yeah, another thing that I have to mention is that he's genuine in his passion. And he's very famous for crying. In many interviews you will find him weeping, crying, because he cannot contain himself. He doesn't even try, which is something that you have to admire. He doesn't try to hide his emotions, and I have a lot of respect for people who does that, for men who don't hide their emotions, because it takes bravery, it takes courage to display openly your emotions, especially in a public environment, in a public conversation. So he's very passionate, and he's very genuine in his passion, and he shows it all the time.
First, with the necessity of putting a foot out into the unknown and making sense of it, and then
so I didn't address this part. It's very beautiful what he says here.
Makes them do that. They can't even help it. And I've had lots of creative people in my clinical practice, and I can tell you the worst thing for creative people is to not be creative because they just die. They're cursed with the necessity of putting a foot out into.
So he's absolutely right here. A trait or some characteristic that defines a creative person, which, by the way, this is something that we have to define, because he always says creative people. And I wish someday I had the opportunity to have a conversation with him in person and ask him what he means with creative people, because he makes this very clear distinction of what is a creative person and what is not a creative person. And actually, I think I saw another video from him where he makes a very clear segregation of creative people and people who are not creative. And he said not everybody is creative. Something that I don't agree with. And this is the whole premise of this channel, to find that creativity in every single human. I do believe that anybody with a functioning brain is capable of being creative. And I really believe that. You just have to put yourself in the right conditions, in the right mental state, in order to achieve that state of creativity. That doesn't need to be expressed in art. Creativity can be expressed in any activity in your life. But he does this very strong distinction, this very strong definition of what is being creative and what is not being creative. And I think it's a problem of semantics. I think it's a problem of trying to define, or how you define people who work in creative activities or in the creative industry, or what is considered creative industry. But he says something here that is very beautiful, that he said, and it's absolutely right. Creative people need to create or they die. This is not literal. Of course, you don't die. But somehow you go against your human nature. You go against your need of producing something. And I think this is something that happens not only to creative people or people who work in the creative industry or have a creative inclination. It happens to everyone, to every single person. Everybody have the need for expression. For expression.
The unknown and making sense of it, and then they're also cursed with the necessity of trying to make a living while they're doing that, which they can't, because you can't. It's almost impossible to monetize creative action as many.
Yeah, and he insists in this idea that it is almost impossible to monetize creative expression, which is partially true. It's not impossible. It's very difficult. You just have to put yourself in the right conditions and in the right place. You have to play the game to be able to monetize your creative work, your creative expression. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but yes, it's very difficult.
Many of you who are creative will no doubt find out. It's very, very frustrating. It's not that creative action is without value, right? Because the creative people are entrepreneurs, and the creative people revitalize cities, and the creative people make things magnificent and beautiful. What's the economic value of that? It's absolutely incalculable. And what's interesting too is that,
well, from that point of view, if you say that creative work is invaluable, well, yeah, how you monetize something that is so valuable that you cannot put a price on it. So from that point of view, yes, monetizing creative work is like an impossible task. And also what he says here is true, that creative people revitalize the economy, and we people with creative abilities create magnificent things that put away beauty, that create beauty for cities, for communities, for everybody to enjoy.
You build that beauty in, and then the farther away you get from it in time, the more valuable it becomes, right? Instead of decaying, it has exactly the opposite effect. Its value magnifies. And anyway, so that's what artists are doing.
So this is another important thing. When you create something that is good, that is valuable, that it have a real artistic value, it doesn't decay. With time, it gets more and more value because more and more people get to enjoy that work. It's a work that transcends.
And so one of the things I would say is buy a damn piece of art, you know? Find one that really speaks to you, and buy a piece of art, because you invite that into your life, and it's a look out if you do it. If it's a real piece of art, because you'll also get
See what he says here, if it's a real piece of art. And I know what he's trying to say, because there is a lot of work right now, and probably a lot of you won't agree with this, but there's a lot of work out there that is being called art that is not. That is bogus. There is a lot of deception. There is a lot of what is that word that you use a lot in the art world? Speculation. There is a lot of speculation, way too much, and it is very easy to put a label of something on something that is not art, that has no value. And just because somebody says it is, somebody with influence says it's art, it becomes art. Or if you put a piece in the right environment, in a gallery or in a museum, even when the piece is meaningless and lacking of intelligence or technical value, but if in the right place, in a gallery, in a museum, and somebody put a label on it, then it suddenly becomes art. It's a very intricate discussion. It's a very difficult conversation to have of defining what is art and what is not art. And that's exactly what I was saying before. When one of the ways to identify what is good art is something that transcends times and survive, and it gets value, it regains value with generations.
a little introduction to the artist, and then that'll seep into your life, and that'll change things like mad. But it's unbelievably worth it, because it opens your eyes to the domain of the transcendent. That's the right way of thinking about it. A real piece of art is a window into the transcendent. That's
here is again with the metaphors and the decorative language. But what he's saying here is something that has to do a lot of the influence that art has on your brain. Exposing yourself to art, to artistic expression, and I'm not talking about painting, I'm talking about all kinds of expressive artistic expressions, all kind of music, poetry, literature, art, paintings, even food. Exposing yourself to all these kind of expressions, human expressions of creativity, it have a great impact in your brain, and it's something that has been measured, and you can see it, you can feel it when you start exposing yourself and experimenting with artistic expressions. You experience noticeable changes in your way of thinking, in your way of experiencing the world.
That's what it is. And you need that in your life, because you're finite and limited and bounded, right, by your ignorance and your lack of knowing. And unless you can make a connection to the transcendent, then you don't have the strength to prevail. And beauty, it's really hard to make something beautiful. And it's really worthwhile. And what's really cool is if you learn to make something beautiful, even one thing, if you could just make one thing in your life beautiful, then you've established a relationship with beauty. And then you can start to expand that relationship with beauty out into the world, like into other elements of your life. And that is so worthwhile. It's just...
Yeah. One of the problems that I have with the way we talk about creativity, or most people talk about art and creativity, is that we always use these terms, these grandiose terms and metaphors to try to express how beautiful, how important, how amazing it is to produce art, or to produce something that is beautiful and have an impact on the viewer or on the audience. I think that kind of talk about creativity is, yes, it's beautiful, but it's detrimental because it pushes away an audience of people who think that maybe art or creativity is not for them. By using this kind of language, you actually put that basic human ability into a bubble that separates us from the average individual. So we have the artist. I'm the artist here in my bubble of, amazing beauty, and we have the mortals over there, down there.
Incredibly, crazily worthwhile. And that's an invitation to the divine. You have to be daring to do that. People are terrified of it. People are terrified of color. They paint their walls beige. They're terrified of art. They buy some mass-produced thing because they don't want anybody laughing at them for their lack of taste. And they would get laughed at because they have no taste. But you have to, well, it's right, because what do you know, right? You have to develop it. And so you're going to stumble along and make mistakes to begin.
There is something very interesting here. Because something that he says that people are afraid of beauty. I don't think that's necessarily true. People are not afraid of beauty. People are afraid of being ridiculed. And because we don't understand beauty, because we have to conform to what society says or what culture says. It is the collective which decide what is beautiful, what is trendy, what is cool. If we don't conform to that, then we're an outcast. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants to be ridiculed. Nobody wants to be seen as out of taste. Whatever this taste is, people are afraid of being that outcast, being labeled as lacking taste, because you don't fit the establishment. You don't fit that what it has been decided that is trendy or cool or beautiful at that moment, that canon of beauty. And nobody wants to break away from that. So what people choose to do is to be neutral, be beige, being gray, being black and white. Never fails. That neutrality is gonna fit everything, everywhere, all the time. And that's what people go for. Instead of being ostracized for not having taste, it's better to have a neutral taste that goes with everything, everywhere.
Begin with, and you're going to show yourself, because if you buy, I think this is pretty, and somebody comes over and goes, hey, what's up with you? It's kind of hard on your self-esteem, but it's you're stumbling towards the right. You're stumbling towards the kingdom of God. That's what you're stumbling towards when you try to make an aesthetic.
See, yeah, there you lost me there. When you say you stumble with the kingdom of God, no, because that is not true. It might seem like a beautiful analogy or a beautiful metaphor, but no, that's not what it's about. There is no God involved. There are no muses. There is no connection with the universe. And I'm gonna repeat this again and again and again because we keep referring to creativity with these terms that are detrimental. They are terribly detrimental. There is no God involved in this creativity thing. We just have the brain and the resources that we can gather and how we process that information. No God, no angels, no muses, none of that. That is not real, and believing in that is actually detrimental.
Decision and to put something in your life that's beautiful, and it's unbelievably worthwhile to do that. And you have to steer clear of the frauds and the con artists and all of that, and art is full of that, of course, because it's difficult to distinguish between the real thing and the fraud, but it's unbelievably worthwhile. And so we need to understand the role of art and literature and stop thinking about it as an option. It's not an option. It's not an option. What is it said? Man does not live by bread alone. That's exactly right. We live by beauty. We live by literature. We live by art. And literally, not metaphorically. We cannot live without it because life is too dismal and tragic in the absence of the sublime.
Okay. So that was Jordan Peterson for you. Again, I don't agree with this guy. I don't agree with most of the things that he says. However, when he talks about creativity in this way, it's difficult for me not to agree. I wouldn't use a lot of metaphors that he uses. I would talk about creativity in a more straightforward manner. But yeah, he's right. He's absolutely right on everything that he said in this talk, in this presentation. This is not going to be the only video that we're going to react to from Jordan Peterson. He has a lot to say about a lot of things. Trust me, a lot of questionable things that he says. But again, not because somebody don't agree with you or somebody don't align to your ideologies or to your way of thinking, doesn't mean that you're going to dismiss them. I am a firm believer that people who disagree with you, people who challenge you, and people who make you uncomfortable are the people who actually make you grow, make you understand things and see things in a different way. It is a mistake to always find the confirmation bias, that listen to the things that you like, filter everything through that point of view. I only listen to what I like, what it pleases me. That's a mistake. Listen to the people who challenge your views. Listen to the people who you disagree with, because those people are gonna either give you something to think about, give you a new perspective and a different point of view, but also it could serve as a reference to not to do the thing. Find value in this kind of people, even when you don't align with their views and their ideologies. I think that's the most important takeaway from this. People who you consider are not the best can still give you value and give you worthy information. If you like this video, consider supporting, like, subscribe. I will see you in the next video.